What if I told you that the life you were meant to live, the power, the clarity, the peace, is still there, buried beneath a voice that was never yours? Fear has stolen more from you than failure ever could. It didn't just stop your steps, it rewrote your identity. But today, that ends. This isn't about motivation. This is about war. A war against the voice that told you to wait, to shrink, to settle. Because once you see fear for what it truly is, you'll never obey it again. And the man you were born to be returns. You were not born afraid. You didn't enter this world questioning your worth. You didn't hesitate before taking your first breath. You didn't ask for permission to cry, to move, to exist. That came later. That was taught. Fear was not in your blood. It was placed in your mind. It began subtly. A warning here, a scolding there, a raised eyebrow when you spoke your truth too loud, a punishment when you wandered too far from the box. And over time you learned not to be safe, but to be small. You mistook the silence of obedience for peace. You thought hesitation was wisdom. You believed doubt was maturity, but it was all a lie. They didn't mean to break you. Most of them were broken themselves, carrying their own inheritance of fear, passing it down like family tradition. They told you to be realistic, not because dreams are dangerous, but because they were too afraid to chase their own. They told you to be careful, not because risk is reckless, but because they never learned how to rise after falling. And you, innocent and open, believed them. You swallowed their fear and called it your nature, but it isn't. And this truth should make you angry, not at them, but at the illusion, at the false self you were forced to wear, at the voice in your head that still sounds like safety but is secretly sabotage. You see, fear is clever. It doesn't come dressed as the villain. It comes disguised as responsibility, as planning, as reason. But underneath all its logic lies the same agenda. Keep you still, keep you quiet, keep you controlled. Fear cannot take what you don't give it, so it waits for you to agree. And you've been agreeing for too long. You've played it safe and called it strategy. You've delayed and called it preparation. But here's the mirror you've been avoiding. What has fear actually protected you from? Not pain, not failure, only growth, only purpose, only the boldness required to become who you were always meant to be. Because fear does not guard the door to your destiny. It bars it. And now the decision arrives. Continue living a life that fear has shaped, or unlearn the lie. Unlearning begins not with action, but with awareness. You must see the lie before you can silence it. You must confront it, drag it into the light, expose it, because once seen clearly, fear shrinks. It no longer controls you unless you allow it to. You were not born afraid. That version of you, unchained, wild, unfiltered, still lives beneath the noise. Not gone, just buried, waiting for you to remember, waiting for you to reclaim. This is your return, and fear, it will still knock, but this time it finds the wrong door. You are not home anymore, not silenced, gone. No voice asking what if. No pit in your stomach when you speak your truth. No hesitation before you make the move, send the message, take the risk. Just stillness, clarity, momentum. Imagine that version of you, the one who doesn't wait for permission, who doesn't apologize for taking up space. He exists. He's not fantasy. He's memory. He's you. Before fear took the mic. Because fear didn't just hold you back, it rewired who you thought you were, and that's the danger no one talks about. Fear is not just an emotion, it's an editor. It doesn't erase your dreams, it rewrites them. It waters down your vision. It replaces passion with politeness, courage with calculation. It doesn't scream, don't do it. It whispers, maybe later. And while you nod, while you agree, your true self sits quietly in the background, forgotten, but not dead. You once saw more clearly than this. Before fear taught you to shrink, you dreamed in full color. You acted with instinct. You didn't think your way out of motion. You moved and let the world catch up. That was real. That was you. And that version still remembers how to lead. The question is, do you remember how to follow him? Because who you'd be without fear is not a mystery. It's not theoretical. It's obvious. He's the one you think about in your best moments, the man you imagine when no one's watching, the one with the voice, the vision, the fire. He moves with purpose, not performance. He builds, not because he's certain, but because he refuses to live in pause. Fear did not give you that fire. It tried to put it out. And yet here you are, still burning. So let's be clear. The man you would be without fear is already inside you, not waiting for you to feel ready, not waiting for more information, more time, more reassurance. He is waiting for you to stop negotiating, to stop asking fear for permission, to stop rehearsing the doubts that have stolen years from your calling. Vision must come first, before logic, before strategy, before fear. Vision is the blueprint, identity is the builder. But fear is the voice of a builder who never breaks ground. So ask yourself, who would I be if I no longer obeyed fear? Not once, not occasionally, but never again. Now imagine becoming that man on purpose. He's already built. But you've got to step into him, word by word, breath by breath, decision by decision. And the moment you do, fear becomes irrelevant, not gone, but ignored. Because the man you're becoming doesn't take orders from voices that never built anything. Fear never takes what you notice. It takes what you don't. It doesn't knock down doors. It leaves them closed and convinces you not to turn the handle. It doesn't steal time with noise. It steals destiny in silence, slowly, quietly. In the moments you convince yourself, now's not the time. In the decisions you don't make. In the dreams you shelve until you're ready. And before you know it, you're living a life shaped not by your vision, but by avoidance. Fear is expensive, but it never shows you the bill up front. You think you're buying time, but you're paying with identity. You think you're buying safety, but you're paying with self-respect. The real cost of fear isn't just the job you didn't take or the words you didn't say. It's the version of you that you never met, the clarity you never found, the peace that never settled in your chest because you kept waiting for the moment to feel right. And that moment never came. Because fear doesn't work like that. It doesn't leave when the world changes. It leaves when you change. It doesn't disappear when the conditions are perfect. It disappears when your decisions become permanent. But until then, it keeps collecting, inch by inch, piece by piece. It takes your conviction, your fire, your confidence, until the reflection in the mirror starts looking like a stranger. You tell yourself you're being patient, but deep down you know fear has made you a prisoner, and you've learned to decorate the cell. You've made peace with the limitation. You've learned to survive in hesitation, but you were not built to survive. You were built to become, and every day fear convinces you to stay still. You trade becoming for existing. That's not safety. That's sabotage. And maybe you haven't felt the weight of it all yet. Maybe life is fine. But fine is the most dangerous enemy of greatness. Because you don't rise in fine. You decay. You settle. You adjust to a smaller version of your life and pretend it's enough. Not because you don't want more, but because fear made you forget what more even looked like. But the moment you remember, the moment you see what was stolen, something shifts. You can feel the tension between the life you have and the one that still calls to you. And that tension, That's the receipt. That's the cost of fear. And it doesn't stop charging interest until you stop paying. So ask yourself, how much have you already given? How many years? How many dreams? How much of your real voice has been traded for approval, for delay, for false protection? And now ask the question that matters more. How much more are you willing to give? Because today, you can stop paying. Fear doesn't come wearing chains. It comes wearing reason. It shows up in the disguise of logic, dressed like a friend, speaking softly in the tone of caution. Just wait until you're more prepared. Maybe now isn't the best time. Let's be smart about this. And you nod because it sounds intelligent, because it sounds safe. But you don't realize you're not agreeing with logic. You're obeying fear in costume. You've been taught to trust what sounds reasonable, to listen when the mind says slow down. But what if that voice wasn't reason at all? What if it was the fear of rejection, dressed as strategy? What if it was the fear of failure, pretending to be maturity? What if every time you called it wisdom, it was actually hesitation that had changed its name? Fear's greatest trick is not shouting in panic. It's whispering in your own voice. You think it's you. You think you're being careful. But what you're really doing is hiding under the weight of what you've been taught to fear. You call it being smart, but smart without motion is stagnation. And stagnation, when repeated, becomes identity. You have built logic systems around lies. You've learned to justify the smaller version of yourself. You've learned to explain away your delay. You've become a master of rational excuses, and you've convinced yourself it's all just part of the plan. But tell me, how many times has your plan been rewritten because fear slipped behind the wheel? How often have you called it timing when really it was avoidance? Let's speak plainly. Logic built on fear is still fear. It's a lie wearing glasses. And it will always give you a reason not to act, not because the world is dangerous, but because fear cannot survive in motion. The moment you begin to move, the mask begins to slip. That's why fear always delays. It buys time. It buys silence. And it keeps you safe, but small, because nothing grows in logic alone. Growth requires risk. Becoming requires leap. Faith makes no sense on paper. And still it builds empires. And you were not meant to live your life in spreadsheets and safety nets. You were meant to step, to fall, to rise, and to remember who you are by doing what doesn't make sense, but does make destiny. So from this moment forward, question the voice that sounds reasonable. If it delays your purpose, if it waters down your fire, if it slows your courage, strip the mask off. Ask it where it came from. Ask it who taught you that fear should sound like planning. Ask it why you've given your life to a voice that's never taken a risk. And then choose. Not what sounds best, not what looks clean, but what aligns with the man you are becoming. Because freedom doesn't wear a mask, and truth doesn't whisper, and neither should you. Fear does not arrive with a bang. It arrives in a whisper. It doesn't scream in your face. It leans in, soft, familiar, and says, "Are you sure?" What if you're wrong? Let's think this through one more time. You don't flinch when it speaks. You listen. Because it doesn't sound like panic. It sounds like you. But it's not you. It's the enemy in your own voice. Fear doesn't need force. It only needs access. And once it has access, it rewrites everything. Not by breaking down your goals, but by slowly reshaping your decisions. It tells you to wait before you leap. It tells you to study before you speak. It tells you to build after you feel ready. But you never do. Because readiness doesn't come from thinking. It comes from moving. And that's exactly what fear prevents. You think fear is something you'll feel when the moment is big. But the most dangerous fear doesn't live in crisis. It lives in comfort, in the daily decisions you delay, the phone call you haven't made, the project you haven't started, the words you haven't said, not because you can't, but because a whisper told you not yet, and you agreed. The quiet enemy thrives in agreement. You didn't argue, you didn't resist, you just said maybe tomorrow. And that's all it needed. One seed planted, one moment of hesitation repeated enough times to become habit. And now that whisper isn't rare, it's routine. But here's the truth. Fear doesn't grow because it's powerful. It grows because it's consistent. It shows up every day, on time, without fail. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't forget. It doesn't need volume. It just needs you to forget who you are. It just needs you to treat possibility like threat and delay like wisdom. And you have. For too long. You don't need to be screamed at to stop. You just need a thought that slips by unchecked. And you've let too many slip. You wonder why your confidence feels cracked, why your path seems foggy, why you keep starting over. It's because the whisper got louder than the vision. And what's repeated wins. So it's time to confront this enemy, not with violence, but with volume. You must speak louder than the fear inside your head. You must declare what you know, not what you feel. You must override the whisper with fire, because silence will not save you. Stillness will not protect you. You have tried both, and the cost was years. From this day forward, you do not negotiate with whispers. You speak truth until fear has no room to speak back. You move so boldly that the quiet enemy can no longer keep up, because the man who moves with clarity no longer hears hesitation. He only hears the sound of destiny unfolding. Danger is real. Fear is imagined. And if you don't learn the difference, you will suffer both, one in the world, the other in your mind, one for a moment, the other for a lifetime. Danger can hurt you. Fear convinces you to never try. Danger is the storm outside. Fear is the one you create inside and obey as if it has the same power, but it doesn't. Fear is not the cliff. It's the thought that tells you to stay off the mountain. It's not the fire. It's the voice that says, never strike a match. You call it protection, but it's really paralysis. And worse, it's invisible. Because while danger announces itself, fear disguises itself. It doesn't come labeled. It shows up wrapped in caution, in overthinking, and soft-spoken concern. You tell yourself, I just need more time. I'm not quite ready. But ready for what? Ready for the moment that never arrives? Ready for the risk that exists only in your head? You do not fear what is, you fear what might be, and that's the trap. You've rehearsed failure so vividly that it feels like memory. You've imagined rejection so often that it feels guaranteed. You've built a future based on shadows, then bowed to it as if it's fate. But nothing has happened yet, except in your mind. That's the cost of confusing fear with danger. You treat thought like reality and react to fiction like it's fact. And that reaction, that's what's stopping you. Not the market, not your background, not your skill. Your response to fear, that's the barrier. You treat it like danger, so you freeze. You plan endlessly. You shrink your dreams until they feel manageable, then call it being realistic. But let's be honest, that's not realism. That's fear dressed up as wisdom. True wisdom knows the difference. It knows danger requires caution, but fear requires challenge. Danger says slow down. Fear says stop. And if you treat them the same, you'll never move. You'll stand still while life races past you. You'll watch other men build what you could have simply because they acted where you hesitated. The man who knows danger learns how to survive, but the man who understands fear, he learns how to live. Because once you see fear for what it is, thought, imagination, emotion, you can choose differently. You can move even while it speaks. You can walk into the moment, heart pounding, and do it anyway. And in that motion, something changes. Fear fades, not because it disappeared, but because it was overruled. So let this be your training. Don't wait for fear to feel safe. Don't treat imagined failure like physical harm. If you want a life worth remembering, you must choose to act when everything in you says to wait. Because courage isn't what you feel before the leap. It's what you decide in spite of the fear, while it still stands in front of you. Hesitation is not random. It's not weakness. It's not lack of will. It is thought, unexamined, unchecked, repeated. And every time you paused, every time you waited when you knew you should have moved, it wasn't because you weren't ready. It was because a quiet voice entered your mind and you didn't question it. You accepted it. You obeyed it. And that moment, at that small decision to believe the whisper, became the pattern that now defines your life. That's the anatomy of hesitation. It's not built in the moment. It's rehearsed long before it. You've trained yourself to pause. You've trained your body to freeze when the unknown appears. You've built neural pathways around retreat. And the worst part is, you didn't know you were doing it. You thought you were being wise. You thought you were being deliberate. But there's a difference between thoughtfulness and fearfulness. One builds, the other stalls. Most men never realize they've chosen the latter. They believe they're planners when they're actually avoiders. They believe they're patient when they're actually afraid. But the results don't lie. Hesitation has a cost. It delays momentum. It dissolves clarity. It builds a habit of staying still until motion itself feels unsafe. And once that happens, opportunity becomes threatening. The call you should make feels like a cliff. The chance you've been praying for feels like pressure. The leap becomes impossible, not because the distance is too great, but because hesitation has made your legs forget how to move. And here's the truth you haven't wanted to face. The longer you wait, the heavier hesitation becomes. It doesn't disappear with time. It deepens. And the more you justify it, the more permanent it feels. You tell yourself, I just need more clarity. But clarity is not found in waiting. It is forged in motion. You say, I'm not ready. But readiness is not something you wait for. It's something you become by doing. Every pause trains the mind to fear the next step more than the current one. And eventually you no longer know how to begin. That's why it's not about action alone. It's about unlearning. You have to trace hesitation back to the thought that created it. Question it, burn it, replace it. Because until you do, hesitation will continue to speak and you will continue to listen. But once you expose the lie, the power breaks. The habit crumbles, and then you move. Not because fear is gone, but because it no longer has the final word. You choose thought deliberately. You rehearse new belief intentionally. You train your mind to step where it once stalled, and you build momentum where there was once only mental noise. Hesitation is not fate, it is a pattern. And the moment you choose differently, the moment you move before thinking, the pattern begins to crack, and the real you begins to return. Fear does not discriminate. It visits every man, the weak and the great. It whispered to Edison. It lingered in Ford's mind. It pressed against Carnegie's ambition. But they did not wait for silence. They did not ask fear to leave. They did not beg for certainty. They moved anyway. That is what separates the remembered from the forgotten. Not talent, not timing, not luck. Movement in the presence of fear. That's the line. And the great ones crossed it daily. Edison failed over 10,000 times. 10,000. Each one an invitation to doubt. Each one a reason to stop. and yet he pressed forward, not because he was fearless, but because he decided that fear did not get to define the outcome. He said, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. That is not optimism. That is war against hesitation. That is a man who moved anyway. Carnegie was not born into wealth. He was not handed empire. He was handed limitation, poverty, obscurity, expectation. But he refused to let fear become identity. He forged belief before he forged steel. While others talked, he acted. While others waited, he built. While others counted risks, he counted on his decision. And that decision, it did not eliminate fear. It eliminated obedience to it. And Ford, they laughed at him, mocked him, called him a dreamer, said the masses didn't need cars, that his ideas were foolish, that his engine designs were impossible. Even his own team told him it couldn't be done. But he didn't flinch. He said, build it anyway. That is not stubbornness. That is clarity loud enough to drown out fear. These men were not fearless. They were faithful to their vision. And that faith, when tested, moved their feet. You see, movement is the only language fear doesn't understand. It can argue with thoughts. It can twist logic. It can delay speech. But it cannot stop a man already in motion. That's why fear's power only works before the first step. Once you begin, it fades. And the world, once paralyzed in your imagination, begins to obey. The men who moved anyway did not have more certainty. They had more resolve. They knew the feeling of fear would pass, but the cost of submission would last. So they moved, shaking, unsure, but forward, and that made all the difference. So stop waiting to feel like them. You already are like them. If you act like them, move before you're ready, speak before you're certain, build while afraid. Because the men who change the world are not the ones who never feel fear. They are the ones who move in spite of it and leave fear behind to watch them rise. Fear does not live in the world. It lives in your mind. It is not found in the economy, in other people's opinions, in the shadows of tomorrow. It begins here in thought. In a single sentence, you allowed to stay. One idea, one whisper, one imagined consequence. That's how it starts. And when repeated, it becomes law, not universal law, not truth, your law, the kind your subconscious enforces without question. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. That's how powerful thought is. It doesn't need proof. It just needs repetition. You've believed things for years simply because you heard them often enough. From parents, teachers, the world, yourself, not because they were true, but because they were constant. You fed them with emotion. You gave them authority. And now, when opportunity knocks, when purpose calls, those same thoughts rise first, loud, automatic, convincing. What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? What if it all falls apart? These are not prophecies. They are echoes, thoughts repeated until they became identity. This is the root of fear. Not the circumstances, not the reality, the thought about it. You are not afraid of the moment. You are afraid of your story about the moment. You are afraid of what you think will happen. And that fear, practiced long enough, becomes the lens through which you see everything. But here's the good news. If repetition created it, repetition can destroy it. You don't need a miracle. You need a decision, a new thought, chosen, spoken, repeated, until it rewires your reaction, until your subconscious is no longer loyal to fear, but to truth, until I can't becomes I am, until what if it goes wrong becomes what if I rise. This isn't theory, it's mental law. The mind does not care if the thought is true, only if it's repeated. It does not care if it helps or hurts, only if it feels real. And reality to the subconscious is repetition with emotion. That's how fear was installed. That's how power must be installed now. So speak what you want to believe over and over with fire, with clarity, with no apology, not once, not occasionally, daily. Because thoughts become habits. Habits become identity. And identity repeated becomes fate. Fear was planted. You didn't choose it. But now you have to unplant it. And that requires work. Relentless, uncomfortable, repetitive work. But this time the repetition is yours. And when your thoughts become deliberate, fear loses the throne, because you were never owned by fear. You were just loyal to the wrong idea. And now you know where to dig. The subconscious is not your enemy. It is your servant. It does not judge. It does not challenge. It does not decide what is true or false, possible or impossible. It simply obeys what is repeated with emotion, with consistency, with conviction. And this is why fear feels so real, not because it is powerful, but because you've repeated it more times than you can count. Repetition is programming, and fear is just old code. It started as a thought, a doubt, a moment of uncertainty. Maybe it was something someone said. Maybe it was something you failed at once. Maybe it wasn't even your voice, but you repeated it. You played it again. You gave it energy. And the subconscious, loyal but unwise, said, understood. And it began to install, not with drama, not with force, quietly, systematically. And now you don't even have to think it. It thinks for you. The hesitation before you speak, installed. The shrinking when opportunity shows up, installed. The impulse to wait until you're ready, installed. It feels automatic because it is. But what's automatic is not always accurate. Fear lives in your life because it lives in your pattern. You've practiced it, perfected it, not intentionally, but consistently. You've said, I can't more than I will. You've thought, what if I fail more than what if I rise? You've believed the whisper more than the vision, and the mind, obedient, mechanical, programmed your body to agree. This is not weakness. This is training. You trained yourself to pause. You trained yourself to retreat. And that means one thing. You can train yourself to move. If fear is the product of repetition, then so is power. This is the truth most men ignore. They wait for belief to show up by accident. They wait for courage to rise naturally. But courage isn't natural. It's installed. You don't speak it once. You speak it until your subconscious bends, until I act in fear's presence becomes as automatic as I freeze when fear speaks, until the mind no longer checks for risk, it checks for alignment. But repetition without emotion is weak. You must feel it. You must say the words not as suggestions, but as laws. You must repeat your identity until the mind has no choice but to obey, not once, not on good days, every day, especially the days when fear feels strongest, because that's when the code is most vulnerable to rewriting. You do not remove fear by thinking about it. You remove fear by replacing it, line by line, thought by thought, until your actions match your declarations, until the programming no longer serves fear, it serves your future. Say this now. I act, I move, I decide. Even when fear speaks, I speak louder. Repeat it, feel it, burn it in. Because the mind will follow whatever voice shows up most often. Make sure that voice is yours. Fear cannot be negotiated with. It cannot be silenced by logic, and it will not surrender to motivation. There is only one force that dismantles it entirely. Faith, not religion, not superstition. Faith as trained certainty. a forged inner knowing, a belief so deep, so rooted it remains standing while everything else trembles. You don't find this kind of faith in books. You don't hear it in speeches. You build it in silence, under pressure. In the moments when fear is loud, but you move anyway. When no one claps, when no one sees, when your hands shake and your voice wavers, but your decision stays planted. That is where faith is born, in the tension between terror and truth. It is not the absence of fear, it is authority in spite of it. Faith is not a feeling. Feelings are unstable, they fluctuate. But faith, real trained faith, is deliberate. It is a choice made so many times that the subconscious no longer requires explanation. It doesn't ask for proof. It doesn't demand results first. It moves. It decides. It acts as if the outcome is already inevitable. That's what separates leaders from spectators, doers from dreamers, builders from believers. Everyone fears. But the faithful man does not obey fear. He acknowledges it and walks through it, because his decisions are no longer controlled by emotion. They are built on inner law. You see, the mistake most people make is they wait to feel confident before they act. But that's not how faith works. Faith is the act, and confidence is the reward. You move first. You decide first. You believe while everything in your body begs you to wait. And when you do, the fear starts to fade, because fear cannot coexist with faith. Where faith speaks, fear falls silent. Where faith moves, fear loses ground. And the more you train it, the more you rehearse certainty in the presence of uncertainty, the more your identity becomes unshakable. Faith is not luck. It is repetition. It is affirming what you know even before you can see it. It is speaking vision when results still look empty. It is planting your flag before the mountain is climbed and doing it again tomorrow and the next day, until the ground beneath your feet no longer shake, because you no longer do. So speak these words not as comfort, but as command. I do not wait to feel strong. I act, and strength follows. I do not ask fear for permission. I move while it speaks. I do not need evidence to believe. I believe, and evidence arrives. Say it again, and again, and again, until the mind stops doubting and starts obeying, because faith is not a visitor, it is a force. And once installed, fear has no place to live. Words are not decoration, they are direction. What you speak, you become, not by magic, but by design. The subconscious listens closely. It listens to every word you say about yourself, about your limits, about your future. And it doesn't argue, it doesn't filter, it simply takes what you say and makes it real. That's how powerful language is. It builds identity. It reinforces belief. It wires the nervous system for action or hesitation. And most men don't realize they're cursing their own progress with casual speech. I'm not ready. I don't know if I can. Let's just see what happens. You think it's harmless. You think you're being honest. But honesty without awareness is sabotage. Because every time you speak weakness, you're not just describing your current state. You're scripting your future one. And the more you say it, the more your mind says, understood, I'll make sure you stay that way. This isn't self-help fluff. This is biology. The brain routes your thoughts based on what you repeat, and what you repeat becomes who you are. You want to stop living small? Stop speaking small. Speak power, speak clarity, speak identity, not insecurity, and not once, not when you feel inspired, every day. Especially the days when fear is loudest, because those are the days your subconscious is listening most. That's how the great ones do it. They don't wait to believe. They speak belief until belief becomes default. You think Henry Ford didn't feel doubt? That Carnegie never had questions? They did. But they never let those questions write their script. Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. That wasn't a quote. That was a warning, because your thoughts, when spoken, shape your world, and your world, when repeated, becomes your destiny. So if you want power, speak it, declare it, install it. I do not wait, I act. I do not fear, I move. I do not hope, I decide. Not because it's already true, but because it must become true. And the subconscious will believe whatever you say with enough frequency and emotion. That's the system. That's the weapon. And here's the truth. Most men stay powerless not because they lack potential, but because they keep reinforcing a powerless identity with their words. You speak hesitation. You speak fear. You speak uncertainty. And then wonder why your life reflects it. You want to break the pattern? Change the language. Start today. Rewrite the script. Let no weak sentence leave your mouth again. No soft declarations. No uncertain tones. Because the man who speaks passively lives passively. But the man who speaks with power begins to believe it. And the man who believes it becomes it. You've tried everything else. You've read the books, watched the videos, collected the quotes. You've waited for the right moment for the fear to ease, for the clarity to come. But none of it moved the needle, because fear does not leave by understanding it. It leaves by outpacing it. You don't think your way out of fear. You walk through it. That is the breakthrough. Not waiting for emotion to shift, but moving anyway. The step is the strategy. The motion is the medicine. The act is the antidote. You've been lied to. You were told fear would pass, that it would shrink if you gave it time. But fear does not shrink with time. It expands. It fills the space you leave open. The longer you wait, the more real it feels, the more familiar it becomes. And what's familiar, even when painful, starts to feel like truth. But fear is not truth. It is permission you keep granting to the part of you that wants to stay the same. There is only one cure: action. And not perfect action, not polished, confident, beautiful movement. Just movement, just forward. One word, one step, one reach into the unknown. And in that moment, everything shifts. Not because fear is gone, but because it has lost its vote. You see, fear is loudest before you move. It does its best work in stillness. It multiplies in hesitation. But the moment your feet start moving, the voice starts fading, because the brain begins responding to what's real, not what's imagined. And what's real? The momentum, the proof, the progress, the repetition of courage and motion. This is why the men you admire are not the ones who felt no fear. They're the ones who built their life in its presence. They moved while afraid. They made the call with their heart racing. They launched while doubting. And that's why they crossed the line you're still staring at. Because they acted when most people think. And thinking is useful until it becomes delay, until it becomes excuse, until it becomes the mask fear wears. When it wants to be respected, don't respect it. Replace it with doing, with deciding, with building, with speaking. Because when you move, the lie loses its grip. And the body begins to learn a new truth. Fear is not fatal. The moment you realize that, you're free. Not free from fear, free from its control. And that's the difference between a man who imagines his potential and a man who lives it. So let this be your reminder, your trigger, your command. You do not defeat fear by waiting. You defeat it by walking. One step every day, no matter how loud the voice is, you move. And fear follows behind, smaller every time. You've been fighting fear like it's a battle, swinging at shadows, trying to silence the voice, trying to crush the emotion. But that's not how you win. You don't defeat fear by force. You outgrow it, because fear doesn't hold power over who you're becoming. It only holds power over who you've been. The version of you that hesitated, that second-guessed, that asked for permission, that version listened to fear like it was truth. But that version is no longer in charge unless you keep feeding him. You've been trying to kill fear. But the goal is not to kill it. The goal is to become the man it can't speak to anymore, to evolve beyond its frequency, to step so fully into your identity that the old fear has nowhere left to land. This is not about war. It's about growth. Because fear only fits in minds that are still shaped by old patterns, old stories, old beliefs. Fear needs a familiar home, and the man you were gave it one. But the man you're becoming, he no longer speaks its language. He doesn't ask what if. He says, watch me. He doesn't need the fear to be gone. He just needs to stop identifying with the one who obeyed it. This is the secret most people miss. They keep trying to overpower fear. They want to feel fearless before they move. But the fearless man is not a man who fought harder. He is the man who built higher, who became too focused, too deliberate, too committed to entertain the whispers. Fear doesn't vanish when you face it. It vanishes when it no longer recognizes you. You're trying to act different while thinking the same. You want to speak bold words, but you still carry the identity of the doubter. You want to lead, but you still see yourself as someone who waits. That tension will tear you apart until you let go of the man who was. You must decide with clarity and finality, that's not me anymore. Not in how I speak, not in how I move, not in how I see myself. And from that decision, everything changes. You build a new standard, a new rhythm. You stop reacting to fear and start ignoring it. Not because you're reckless, but because you've outgrown the need to negotiate with emotion. Fear belongs to the man who didn't know who he was. You do now. And when fear returns, because it will, let it find nothing familiar. Let it search your thoughts and find only certainty. Let it knock and hear no answer. Let it whisper and be drowned out by the sound of your next step. Because you are not fighting fear anymore. You're too far ahead. You've been told to fake it till you make it, to act confident, speak boldly, move with power, and eventually belief will follow. But that's not how identity works. You don't act your way into belief. You believe your way into action. Action is a fruit. Identity is the root. And if the root is weak, if you see yourself as small, doubtful, uncertain, then every action will eventually bend back toward that belief. This is why willpower fails, why motivation wears off, why you take the first step, then stall at the second, because you're acting like a man you haven't yet decided you are. You're wearing the armor of strength, but underneath it, your identity still whispers fear. The body follows the belief. You can speak powerful words. You can take bold steps. But if deep down you still believe, I'm not ready, I'm not enough, I always mess this up, then your subconscious will obey that. Not your goals, not your plans, not your strategy. It will drag you back into alignment with who you think you are, because the mind is loyal. And it is loyal first to identity, not desire. So the real work is internal. Not building better habits, not forcing more action, not trying harder. It's rewriting who you believe yourself to be, because when identity shifts, action becomes automatic. A lion doesn't practice courage. It moves as a lion moves. An architect doesn't try to design. He does because it's who he is. You will only move consistently like a leader, a builder, a finisher, when that is the image you hold of yourself. And how is that image formed? Repetition, emotion, decision. You must speak the new identity aloud. You must declare who you are before your life reflects it. You must feel it, see it, affirm it, until the subconscious surrenders and installs it as law. I am the man who moves without fear. I am the one who follows through. I am the builder of things that last. Not because you've done it yet, but because you've decided you will. And your subconscious doesn't wait for proof. It waits for consistency. This is not fake. This is formation. The world trains you to wait until results validate belief. But the men who shape history, they believed first. And they acted from that belief. That's why their steps were firm. That's why their voices carried. That's why their momentum never slowed. Their identity was not up for debate. And now, neither is yours. From this moment forward, don't ask, what should I do? Ask instead, who must I be? Because when that answer is clear, the doing becomes inevitable. Fear does not grow in isolation. It is fed, it is fertilized, it is reinforced, not always by your own thoughts, but by the voices around you. The wrong circle feeds fear, not with insults, not with mockery, with doubt disguised as concern, with hesitation spoken as just being careful, with opinions that sound rational, but choke your momentum. You think it's your inner voice that's the problem, but what if that voice was trained by someone else? What if the fear you feel is not yours, but borrowed, absorbed from people who never dared, echoed from men who've made peace with mediocrity and now offer you advice wrapped in limits? That's why this chapter matters. If you want to rise, you must audit your environment, because the people you allow into your space do one of two things. They either call you higher, or they quietly pull you back into comfort. And comfort, unchecked, becomes a grave. Fear doesn't need to scream to be installed. It only needs repetition. And your environment is constant repetition. Every conversation, every complaint, every time someone rolls their eyes at your ambition, every time they say, "Are you sure?" Every time they settle and want you to settle too. Fear is contagious. You must protect your atmosphere like a gate, not out of arrogance, out of necessity. You are not just protecting your mood. You are protecting your future. And that means cutting access, eliminating voices that teach fear, replacing them with builders, movers, truth speakers. Carnegie did it. He built a mastermind of men who thought beyond limitation, not men who agreed with him, men who refused to shrink. Edison, Ford, Lincoln, all of them surrounded themselves with clarity. They chose their circle with the same precision they chose their goals, because they knew the truth. Proximity is programming. You will begin to think like who you sit with. You will begin to shrink or rise based on the air you breathe, and the air is filled with the language of the people closest to you. So ask yourself, who feeds your fear? Who triggers your hesitation? Who speaks in ways that make smallness sound wise? Then ask the more important question, who challenges your excuses? Who demands your greatness? Who makes your fear feel stupid just by the way they move? Build your life around those people, or become one of them, and let your presence clean the air of others. But never again stay in a space that trains you to settle, because you are not just shaping your day, you are shaping your mind, and your mind becomes your future. So audit the air, clean it, protect it, because the man you are becoming depends on what you allow to echo. The man who always leaves an exit never fully commits. He dips his toe in greatness, but keeps his foot in comfort. He dreams with one hand while clinging to safety with the other, and that is why he never becomes. Because transformation does not come to the man with backup plans. It comes to the one who burns the bridge. You've been told to be smart, to have options, to leave room to retreat. But that's not wisdom, that's fear in disguise. Greatness demands finality, not recklessness, certainty, a decision so solid that no escape remains, not because you don't feel fear, but because you've removed every route that would let it win. You say you want change, but you still keep the job you hate just in case. You say you want to go all in, but keep rehearsing what you'll do if it doesn't work out. That's not belief. That's hesitation with a safety net. And the man who hesitates cannot rise, because fear thrives in options. It thrives in indecision. It whispers, you can always turn back. You can always go home. But the man who burns the bridge, who removes the retreat, hears none of that. Because the mind, once committed without escape, becomes dangerous. It finds energy you didn't know you had. It pulls power from places you forgot existed. It invents solutions. It deepens focus because it has to. That's the secret the world won't tell you. Necessity breeds genius, but only for the man who leaves no room to fail safely. Look at every builder of empires, Carnegie, Ford, Lincoln. They didn't tiptoe their way in. They stepped onto the battlefield of life, torched the boats, and said, forward is the only direction. When Ford built his company, the experts told him the V8 engine couldn't be done. His engineers failed again and again, but Ford didn't back off. He said, build it anyway. And they did. Not because they were smarter, but because there was no alternative. That's what burning the bridge does. It makes forward the only option. And when forward is the only option, victory becomes inevitable. So stop keeping escape routes for the man you no longer want to be. Delete the fallback plan. Walk away from what you'd run to if this fails. Remove the safety net and build your wings instead. You were not made to survive. You were made to soar. But you can't do both, and the sky does not open for men with one foot on the shore. So light the match, let the fire rise, burn the bridge, and become the man with no retreat. Only rise. Fear doesn't give up. It doesn't leave after one victory. It doesn't vanish when you speak one truth or take one bold step. It waits, it watches, it returns, and if you don't, it will replace you. This is what most men never understand. Power is not earned once. It is earned daily. Discipline is not installed and left alone. It must be maintained. Fear is persistent, but so are you, if you choose to be. Because the mind you're building is not made of stone. It's made of repetition. If you stop feeding it power, it will return to default. And default is fear, not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because fear is always the louder voice by default. You must choose to be louder by design. This is why rituals matter. This is why declarations matter, not because they sound nice, but because they remind you who you are when the world tries to make you forget. You think you lost momentum because of failure, but momentum dies long before failure. It dies the moment you stop returning to the source, to the identity, to the belief, to the man you declared yourself to be. You can't speak it once. You can't move once. You must return, rehearse, rebuild every single day, because fear doesn't care what you said yesterday. It only cares what you believe right now. And if today you're tired, distracted, discouraged, fear sees the opening and it slips back in. That's why the most dangerous moment isn't the big failure. It's the quiet drift, the skipped morning, the silent voice, the day you don't speak your truth out loud because you assume yesterday's fire is still burning. But the fire fades unless you fan it. You don't rise once, you rise again. You don't master fear with a speech. You master it with a rhythm. Fear is a voice, so you must speak louder. Fear is a habit, so you must build a stronger one. And the man who returns daily cannot be replaced, because fear may visit, but it finds the door locked the ground guarded, the mind already occupied, occupied with vision, with clarity, with the sound of truth louder than emotion. So let this be your command. Return, even when you don't feel like it, especially then. Speak the words again. Move your body again. Rehearse the identity again. You don't need more courage. You need more return. Because the man who comes back to the fire every day never goes cold. And the man who refuses to drift becomes the one fear can no longer find.